Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the remainder of the Thousand Year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to follow. What happened to Yachiru after the Thousand Year Blood War arc? The tiny, pink-haired vice captain of the bloodthirsty 11th Division doesn't have a huge role to play in Bleach, but her starring turn comes during the Great Soul King War, where the character undergoes something of a surprising metamorphosis, one that potentially throws her future into some kind of jeopardy. Everything we thought we knew about Yachiru, and by extension her relationship with her captain Kenpachi Zaraki, is upturned dramatically, resulting in a development that has enormous, potentially everlasting ramifications for the character. Kenpachi himself is the recipient of a major subplot of character development within the Thousand Year Blood War arc, a miniature story contained unto itself, one that sees him not only wrestling with the lineage of the title of Kenpachi, but unlocking the true power of his once nameless zanpakutō as well. Yachiru, as it turns out, is intimately tied to this character development. During his battle with Gremi, Kenpachi reveals his Shikai at long last, no Zarashi. And yet, while that was the spectacle that everyone had been waiting years to see, something else was quietly happening, burgeoning behind the scenes, as Yachiru completely vanishes. So, what's going on with Yachiru Kusajishi, a character who has been with us since the days of the Soul Society arc, and who many wanted to see tap into their long, gestating and unexplored potential? What's the truth behind the mysterious child Kenpachi met in the depths of the deadly outer districts of the Rukongai? What does her disappearance mean, and what does the future hold for the character beyond the Thousand Year Blood War arc? Is there any room left for Yachiru in the story still to come? Let's find out. Before we get started, if you want to help support the channel that extra step further, there's a link to the Patreon down in the description below. Check it out, consider supporting me over there, it is greatly appreciated, and a huge thank you and a massive shout out goes out to everyone whose name is appearing in the credits right now. Each and every one of you is helping to keep the lights on here on the channel, so again, thank you all so very much. The Thousand Year Blood War arc gives Yachiru her biggest forward-facing role in Bleach to date, and even then she doesn't get all that much to do. The community had been waiting with bated breath to see her fight for years. In fact, it's kind of amusing that the two most important women in Kenpachi's life, Unohana and Yachiru, which is a little confusing, were both characters that readers were dying to see take up arms at some point, and both of them delivered in the exact same arc. Admittedly, Yachiru's fight, the lieutenant, not Unohana, isn't that great. She battles Sternritter V, the Vanishing Point Gwenael Lee, and we get to see her Shikai Sanpo Kenji for the first time. Though of course, from Isane's perspective, acting as a kind of avatar for the reader, this thing doesn't resemble a Shikai at all. And that right there was really the first major hint in this arc as to Yachiru's true nature, that something isn't quite normal. Although Yachiru ultimately defeats Gwenael fairly easily with her Shikai, he is then killed by the real Sternritter V, Gremi Thamo, the Visionary, who proceeds to overwhelm Yachiru with ease until Kenpachi arrives. As Kenpachi battles Gremi, eventually revealing the name of his zanpakutō to be Nozarashi, and releasing his Shikai in order to split a meteor in two, we get a lovely moment where, despite the immeasurable bombast of the situation, the actual reveal of Kenpachi's blade feels surprisingly quiet. And that's due to the fact that as he soars into the sky above, meeting his destiny in many ways, relishing in the name of his blade at long last, Yachiru watches from far below, remembering their first meeting all those years ago in the Rukongai. After saving the little girl from various thugs and criminals, Kenpachi asked Yachiru her name, but the girl didn't respond. Instead, she simply reached out and placed a bloodied hand on his jagged blade. Of course, nowadays, that feels like the ultimate foreshadowing, and it's undeniably a cool moment to revisit here in the final arc. And back then, suspicions were absolutely raised as to what was actually happening here. And again, I just have to point out how really well done that scene was. Yes, it was very dynamic. Yes, it was very cinematic. But again, it was tender, it was quiet, and it was oddly solemn. And I think a lesser manga artist would have focused entirely on the spectacle, on trying to make it as epic a moment as possible. But here, Yachiru is a vital part of this moment of Kenpachi's journey, and there's an interesting way of looking at this scene. It almost feels like Kenpachi is leaving her behind, as though he has now discovered what he truly needs, what he's been longing for all this time, that name that he has been missing all this time. But of course, that's not what's actually happening here. Yachiru remains integral, and I think she knows that as well. There is an unspoken bond between the two of them, and that really comes to the forefront here in this moment. I mean, quite literally, this is the turning point. Everything changes for their relationship from this point onwards. And so, once Gremmy defeats himself and Kenpachi returns to the battlefield, he discovers something incredibly strange. Yachiru is gone. Not just missing, she's physically vanished from the spot, leaving behind her uniform completely intact, with the vice captain's badge still tied around the Shihakusho's sleeve. And we've seen something similar to this before, not in terms of the subject matter, of course, but the execution. In the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, the early victims of Aizen's holoification experiments had their konpaku completely destroyed because they couldn't handle the holo-reiatsu injection, essentially meaning their soul bodies vanished, leaving behind their clothes still perfectly put together in such a way as to have been very difficult to have physically taken them off, which is the key that kind of led Kisuke to discover that their bodies had been destroyed. Of course, Yachiru isn't a victim of holoification, but her konpaku has just completely vanished from this particular material plane in a similar way. We then don't see Yachiru for almost 100 chapters in the manga, though Kenpachi continues to try and search for her, even as Yhwach kills the Soul King and threatens to destroy the entire world. She is front and center in Kenpachi's mind. The next time we do see Yachiru is during Kenpachi's battle with Sternritter M. Gerard Valkyrie, in the closing chapters of the arc. As Kenpachi is completely overwhelmed by Gerard, even after removing his eye patch and releasing his Shikai, Yachiru appears before the fallen captain and offers him her aid. Though Kenpachi can't understand where she's been and why she's showing up so nonchalantly out of the blue here of all places, Yachiru takes her former captain's hand, and power, new power, flows into him. As Yachiru tells Kenpachi that if he used her properly, there's no one he can't cut, Kenpachi stares in shock at the newfound power the child has given him. With the gleam of a sword clearly imprinted in her eyes, Yachiru tells Kenpachi that she's bestowed him with the power of bankai. If it wasn't already pretty obvious what's going on, this final appearance from Yachiru pretty much seals the deal. After defeating Unohana at the start of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Kenpachi was suddenly able to hear his zanpakutō's voice after centuries of neglect, and it introduced itself to him as we would discover Nozarashi. With the advent of Kenpachi releasing his Shikai against Gremmy, Yachiru disappeared, as she was now able to return to Kenpachi's inner world as his zanpakutō spirit all along. Alright, well, it's not quite that simple. Yachiru isn't just the spirit of Nozarashi manifested, but more accurately, she represents the spirit of Nozarashi's bankai in particular, while Nozarashi's actual zanpakutō spirit, I suppose you could say just the Shikai version, is that of an adult woman, as was revealed by Kubo on Club outside. So, this answers a few questions, while also presenting a few more. The voice Kenpachi heard after his battle with Unohana was clearly supposed to be the voice of the adult woman, of Nozarashi herself. This also explains why Yachiru was able to simply give Kenpachi the power of bankai. She literally is Nozarashi's bankai personified, and she and Kenpachi have fostered an incredibly close relationship over the years since he saved her, ironically considering his overall treatment of his zanpakutō in the past. Out of nowhere, Kenpachi possibly has one of the closest relationships with his bankai specifically of all of the captains. And again, as mentioned on Club Outside, he effectively helped turn her into a Shinigami of sorts. But I also have to wonder, why did Yachiru only vanish when she actively saw Kenpachi using Shikai? Was she incapable of realizing or sensing that he'd managed to speak with Nozarashi beforehand, despite, well, both Nozarashi and Kenpachi technically being a part of her? Or maybe more accurately, she's a part of them. Was she perhaps physically cut off from Nozarashi? But if that was the case, how did simply seeing Nozarashi released allow her to return to Kenpachi's subconscious, especially since Yachiru is the aspect of Bankai, not Shikai? Perhaps Yachiru returning to Kenpachi's inner world in that moment was actually out of her hands. Maybe it wasn't a conscious decision on her part. I guess a fairly important question to ask is, did Yachiru herself actually know that she was an aspect of Nozarashi? Or did it come as a surprise to her when she completely vanished? Anyway, speaking of Shikai, Yachiru's peculiar Shikai Sanpo Kenju isn't a Shikai at all, as she isn't capable of wielding a zanpakutō. Since, well, she actually is one herself, manifested into the world thanks to Kenpachi's own unfathomable power. Instead, Sanpo Kenju is an extension of Kenpachi's own power, again, strong enough to take physical form, though only when Yachiru calls them out. The very last time we see Yachiru in the manga is during Kenpachi's battle with Gerard, after he's now released his unnamed bankai. As Gerard releases his Quincy Volston dish, Kenpachi prepares to continue the fight, but his arm splits in two out of nowhere, as Yachiru apologizes for releasing too much of his power at once. His body in its current state can't contain it. It's not quite ready for the full strength of his bankai. And I like that because it shows that Kenpachi still has a way to go, which is realistic. Most Shinigami take 10 years to master bankai after learning it. This is the very first time Kenpachi has ever used it, so he still has somewhere to climb, even if perhaps it won't take him quite that long. Yachiru's final scene has always been a little weird to me as well, though, because she is strangely flippant about the fact that she's just completely kneecapped Kenpachi in the middle of a life and death battle. By accident, sure, but he could have easily been killed in that moment. At the same time, though, I do like seeing her riding upon Bankai Kenpachi's shoulder. It feels like a natural extension of where their relationship was, and how she's now always got his back in a very literal way. Before we continue, consider hitting subscribe down below to help us reach 300,000 subs by the end of the year. Maybe you're new here, maybe you haven't hit that button yet, but over 50% of you are not yet subscribed, so help change that today by hitting the button down below. It would mean an awful lot, and it would help me out a great deal as well. Before we move on to look at the future of this character, has the anime changed anything about this dynamic yet? Well, the answer is no. So far, I would say Kenpachi's subplot has actually been handled quite faithfully. That being said, both the reveal of Kenpachi's bankai and Yachiru's true nature have yet to be animated, and will likely see them fairly early into Core 4. I, for one, can't wait to see if the anime chooses to add any additional context to Yachiru's reveal. It's handled well in the manga, but I wonder if the usage of Kenpachi's bankai might be extended in general, as it really only lasts for a single chapter. So, with all that said, what happened to Yachiru after the 1,000-Year Blood War arc? Well, truth be told, we don't really know, but we can hazard a fairly educated guess at where the character now stands. For starters, Yachiru is completely gone, having totally vanished from normal Shinigami life. It's hard to know what the kind of status quo is regarding who knows what. Did Kenpachi explain the truth to the likes of Ikkaku and Yumichika in the 10 years between chapters 684 and 685? Or did they kind of just accept it in their own way? I imagine they know that Yachiru wasn't killed, or else Kenpachi would have been completely consumed by unstoppable rage. But Kenpachi also isn't really the kind of person to dive deep into what's going on inside. Truthfully, and this is important as well, in the same way I asked a moment ago if Yachiru even knew that she was an aspect of Nozarashi, we don't know how much even Kenpachi himself really knows about what's going on. It's clear that when Kenpachi finally spoke to Nozarashi at the start of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, she never mentioned anything about Yachiru. How much do they really know about each other? On Club Outside, Kubo likened it to the relationship between Zangetsu and Tensa Zangetsu, which makes some sense, though is admittedly weird considering those two turned out to not even be zanpakutō spirits at all. The closest we get to any kind of acknowledgement of Yachiru's situation is A, the fact the position of vice captain has now been filled post-war by Ikkaku, so she obviously was prominently absent, and Kenpachi himself must have realised, at least subconsciously, that she's never coming back. At least, not in that way. And then in chapter 685, Kenpachi tells Ikkaku outright that he only used to get lost around the Serete because of Yachiru, but now that she's not around, he can find his way just fine. While there's very little to glean from that, everyone seems fairly nonplussed about Yachiru being gone, so clearly there's been some understanding at some point. The sad thing about there being a huge time skip between the very end of the war and then 10 years into the future, and why I keep harping on about that I would love more of the direct aftermath, is that we have now completely missed out on potentially loads of character moments and growth points that would have just been great to see. For example, if Kenpachi has now mastered his bankai, and has done so by spending time in his inner world with Yachiru, we've all but totally skipped over that, which is a shame. To be honest, and this is complete speculation, but no matter how the anime ends, I really wouldn't be surprised to get some kind of wrap-up epilogue that takes us around the various characters, including those who were left out of the manga's ending, and just give us even a tiny glimpse into where they currently are. And if that does happen, I wouldn't be surprised to see Yachiru one last time, even after the war is over. For now, in regards to what's happened to Yachiru after the Thousand Year Blood War arc, well, she's taken up her mantle within Kenpachi's inner world as the spirit of his bankai. How exactly does that work? What does that look like? Well, let's discuss that briefly too. So, what does the possible future look like for Yachiru, if there is one at all? If the Hell arc does happen at some point, I would be amazed if Yachiru doesn't feature, even if it's just a very brief cameo. But I think it would be extremely cool to get a glimpse into Kenpachi's inner world, to see him conversing with Yachiru, and yes, hopefully Nozarashi too. And that's what I mean when I say, I wonder how this works. Because we've never seen a situation like this before. If Kubo's assertion that Nozarashi and Yachiru's relationship really is like Zangetsu and Tensa Zangetsu, then does that mean Kenpachi has to enter his inner world in Bankai in order to speak with Yachiru specifically? That doesn't seem to make too much sense to me, and it doesn't seem particularly likely either, considering, well, the animalistic, instinctive nature of his bankai, at least as we know it so far. I don't imagine him being all that introspective while it's active. Again, I'm not sure how much stock to put into using Zangetsu as a yardstick here, since they aren't even zanpakutō. If anything, it feels much more likely that Kenpachi will speak with Nozarashi herself, and I bet she resembles Unohana, by the way, or it's possible that both Nozarashi and Yachiru can just coexist at the same time inside Kenpachi's soul. Realistically, there's no reason why that wouldn't happen, and again, that's if we deviate from using the Zangetsus as an example, which I'm somewhat inclined to do. As like I said, remember, this really is unlike anything we've ever known before in Bleach. Does Yachiru hold any sway over Nozarashi? After all, she technically knows Kenpachi much, much better than Nozarashi does. The Blade is Me doesn't seem to really account for one side of the equation being, for all intents and purposes, shut out for centuries, while the bankai specifically flourishes. It's very, very odd, and I can't help but think that it would spark all sorts of major problems in Paradise. Certainly, I wouldn't imagine Kenpachi's soul is particularly well balanced. But I also wonder if Kubo might just skip over all of that for clarity's sake. Also, is it possible for Kenpachi to manifest Yachiru back into his world again as a physical being? Of course, he achieved that completely unconsciously initially, and it also kind of feels like that came about due not only to Kenpachi's immense power, but also his inability to control it, which again, as of the Thousand Year Blood War arc's second invasion, has now been resolved. As Kenpachi arrives to fight Gremmy, some of his men are shocked to realise that he's been there from the start, as they couldn't sense his power until he seemingly wanted them to, implying he's now got it under control and it isn't constantly flowing. Anyway, the future, post the Thousand Year Blood War arc, is weird for Yachiru, there's no doubt about it. Again, I want to reiterate that if there is a new arc to come, then I definitely think we will see her in some capacity. Maybe even as Kenpachi has a rematch with a now hell-bound Unohana. And I'm sorry, but Kenpachi's devilish bankai versus a hellish Unohana in hell itself sounds absolutely perfect to me, and now I really want to see it. I also think the anime will include some new scenes for her, even if it's very brief, perhaps after the 10-year time skip or immediately after the war, just to show us exactly what this new setup looks like. Maybe Kenpachi himself even speaks with Ikkaku and Yumichika in the direct aftermath of the war, finally at peace with all aspects of his soul at last knowing their true names. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. What lies in store for Yachiru Kusajishi in the future beyond the Thousand Year Blood War arc? I'd love to get all of your thoughts down in the comments below. And also, do you think Core 4 of the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime will retain everything regarding Yachiru? She's going to play a small, but let's face it, pretty pivotal role in Core 4. It's going to be a big, big moment when she does actually show up. Do you think it's going to be left intact? Will they add some pieces? Will they extend it? I'd love to get all of your thoughts, so do let me know down in the comments below. And if you want to get a little more granular, how does the relationship now work between Kenpachi, Nozarashi, and Yachiru? Considering the state of that soul, it seems pretty messy to me. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Remember to hit subscribe if you haven't done already. I do greatly appreciate all of the support. It means absolutely everything on our journey to 300,000 subs. Consider checking out the Patreon as well if you want to take the support another step further for the channel. It does make a massive difference and it does mean everything as well. And a huge thank you and a huge shout out goes out to everyone on screen who is supporting the channel as a patron. Again, it does help me out a lot and it's greatly appreciated. Alright guys, well, until next time, I'll catch you later and I'll see you then.